Hi there everybody, welcome to Organisational Behaviour Buzzy 1029. In this video we're going to talk about individuals in groups. We've previously thought about individuals and explaining individuals' behaviours in terms of individuals' motivations and individuals' personalities. What we now want to start to think about is how individuals' behaviours are changed when they're put into a social context with other people. So by the end of this session, you should be able to identify some indirect group effects on individuals, some direct group effects on individuals, and also think about the benefits and challenges of these group effects on individuals, particularly within organisational settings. The core reading for this is Huczynski and Buchanan, Chapter 11 in the 6th edition, Chapter 12 in the 9th edition. So the background to this session is a move from thinking just about psychology to thinking about social psychology. So whereas psychologists were interested in understanding individuals' personality traits and thinking about how individuals' personalities explained or caused their attitudes and behaviours, social psychologists don't deny that individuals' personalities, traits, and so on and so forth affect people's attitudes. But they're also keen to point out that the environment, particularly the social environment, the other people that are around individuals, have a massive effect as well, such that you could put a neurotic person into a particular environment and they might become very extroverted. You could put an introvert in another environment and they might become incredibly agreeable or conscientious. In other words, social psychologists recognise that people don't just have a personality trait that is revealed in every situation. They don't just have a certain motivation that is, the same in every setting. Rather, their motivations, their personalities change and can be changed in very profound ways depending on the social environment. So in social psychology we have two broad antecedents, or things that cause people's behaviour in organisations: their individual traits and the social environment. So we already saw towards the end of our video on personality how one way of theorising our personality is to think about the self. And we talked about how the self comprises our sense of both who we are, but also what those around us think we should be. So we talked about the social self. And it's just intuitively clear, I think, to most of us that part of our sense of who we are depends on the types of groups or organisations which we align ourselves with. If we think of ourselves as a certain type of person, as belonging to a certain type of group, that's going to change our perception of who we are, which is of course going to affect our personality. Social psychologists, though, are a little bit less interested in thinking about how people adapt their personality depending on the membership of the groups that they're in, but rather they're interested in understanding the processes through which groups change or can influence people's sense of who they are, their attitudes, and ultimately their behaviour. So we're going to look at two broad sets, and the lines between these two sets of processes is a little bit fuzzy in places, but hopefully just as a heuristic to try to help us understand them. We can think about groups as having an indirect influence on people, on the individuals inside the groups, and a direct influence on them. So the indirect influence typically is going to change people's attitudes and perceptions, and the direct influences are going to work on people's behaviours. And actually, I've realised I've missed one out there. Sanctions. Let's just add that in whilst I remember. So let's get going. We'll start with some indirect influences. We're going to look at a few. And all of these have been shown by psychologists to be processes which affect how people think about the world around them. So the first attempt to explain this was known as social representations theory. And the core idea in social representations theory is that our definitions of the things we're trying to achieve, what's important to us, are usually created out of our membership of particular groups. But not only do we create the kind of objects, the things that we're interested in through groups, and different groups can look at the same object in different ways, but the groups that we're in also provide for us a set of acceptable attitudes towards those groups. So, if you think about work, different groups of people represent work in different ways. You could see working as a way of earning money to survive. You could see working as a way of becoming wealthy, to enjoy yourself outside of work. You could see working as a vocation, as something which you're supposed to be intrinsically rewarded by and enjoy. You could see work as a real imposition on your time, something that really annoys you. In social representations theory, they accept all of those definitions of work can be true for different groups, but within particular groups, so say like a particular profession, they will have their own definition of work, and it might draw on one or two of those different representations, but it will anchor everybody that's in the group that they'll all have the same way of representing work. In fact, I conducted some research with advertising agents on Twitter to see how they would represent their work socially by linking all of their comments together through this notion of agency life. And it was a way of advertising agents socially representing what they were doing, presenting it in a positive light. And so one of the first ways in which groups influence individuals is by representing the objects of interest to them, giving them a way of understanding and relating to those objects. Another way of getting at this is known as framing theory. And here the idea is the groups that you're part of, whether that's a formal group like a department in an organisation or an informal group like a friendship group, they provide a frame around the things that are happening which shapes how you perceive it. So the classic example here would be, in many organisations, decisions are framed differently in the marketing department as opposed to the production or engineering or accounting department. So accountants will tend to see investments as a cost, something that needs to be minimised. Marketers would see investment, say, in advertising as a way of creating immeasurable brand loyalty and value for customers. Engineers and production typically don't have a lot of time for branding and like to think about the real things that the company is making. And frame theory tells us the groups that we're in shape the ways that we frame things in organisations. So it's quite linked to social representations theory, the idea being in social representations theory that literally in the groups we're constantly trying to understand the world around us, creating meaningful objects for each other. Frame theory tells us that essentially we have like a vocabulary that we inherit from our group, and the way we describe things, the way that our groups lets us talk about things, shapes the way we interpret things. So again, in marketing you would see an investment in branding as being an investment in brand value. In accountancy you'd see that as a cost. So you see how these are all quite diffuse or indirect ways in which groups can change what people think. And then the theory is, once you change what people think, you can change their attitudes about objects or their understanding of objects in organisations. You're going to change their behaviour. If you think of something as an investment rather than a cost, obviously you'll relate to it far more positively than you would if you just saw it as a cost that is going to be minimised. These have been shown to be incredibly powerful processes affecting organisations. If you're interested, frame theory has been used extensively in org studies, particularly by a researcher called Sarah Kaplan, who's been really interested in understanding what she calls the framing practices, or the ways that different groups are able to shape what people think in organisations about the same object. And so in her example, she looks at engineers versus marketers in the same company working on the same project and shows how they engage in different practices, not only to frame it amongst themselves, but to try to get their framing as the dominant one in the organisation. This is a model that she draws to get to some of those processes. So we've looked at social representations, we've looked at frame theory. There's a few more indirect effects that we can consider. Perhaps the most prominent of these is what's called social learning. Social psychologists early on realised that if you see other people doing things, you will often assume that you need to do it as well. And they call this social learning. So the idea is we don't need to be told what to do. If we observe, and sometimes it's called observational learning, if we observe other people doing something, enacting a particular type of behaviour, we will often just copy them. You can think about this when you go to a nightclub or a party. If no one's dancing, you don't dance. But if you walked into a room and everyone was dancing, you'd probably start dancing as well. There was a powerful illustration of this in the 1970s, I believe, by a researcher called Bandura. I need to stop saying known as. By a researcher called Bandura, in an experiment called the Bobo doll experiment. So Bandura got some preschool children, and he took them round a little tour of some rooms, like a mock-up apartment building. And in one of the rooms, there was these toys. And he let one group of kids see adults playing with the toys and being really nice to them and cuddling them. And then he let another group of kids see adults throwing the toys around and just being really naughty and violent. And then later on, they just left the kids in the room with the toys, with no adults around and no instructions. And what they found was the kids who had seen the adults being nice with the toys played really nicely with them. The kids that saw the adults being mean to the toys were really mean to them. And this is taken as powerful evidence of the ways that just seeing other people do stuff can change our behaviour. We learn by socially observing or seeing what other people around us are doing. In fact, Bandura later did this by showing videos rather than showing actual adults, and again found people will copy what they see on screen. This has been used extensively in media studies to argue against, violent films and video games, suggesting that people learn how to behave, and it normalises certain types of behaviour. So we've got three very powerful ways in which groups can indirectly, or the social context in which we are, can indirectly change our behaviour. In social learning, we see how other people are acting, and we'll act like that as well, irrelevant of what we think. In framing theory and social representations theory, groups are able to change how we think about the world by representing things in certain ways to us, or framing things using certain languages and imagery. So that's some of the indirect effects that we wanted to look at, indirect group effects that can change people's attitudes and behaviours. Now let's consider some of the direct effects. And these are going to be ways in which groups change not what we think, but what we do. In social psychology, some very famous early studies investigated a phenomenon called obedience. What they found was, if someone gets instructed to do something, irrelevant of what they think about it, they will often be obedient. They will unquestioningly do what they're told. This was illustrated by Stanley Milgram in what's now known as the Milgram experiments. And in these experiments, they were set up such that the subject was brought in and asked to administer a test. So you had to ask somebody questions. And every time the person answered incorrectly, they had to administer an electric shock. It turned out the person that was answering the questions was an actor, and they'd start screaming and shouting in pain. And each question that they got wrong, the electric shock went up and up and up. Of course, they weren't really being electrocuted, they were just acting. And Milgram did this because he wanted to see at what point would somebody stop asking questions and say, I'm not doing this anymore. And he found people would typically administer lethal electric shocks to somebody they didn't know just because they got a question wrong, just because somebody had given them instructions to do so. And in fact, some of the experimenters who were telling people what to do, giving them the questions to ask, when people would turn around and say, do I have to keep doing this? They would either just look at them, they wouldn't say anything, or they'd just say, you've been asked to follow the instructions. And people would then administer these lethal doses. Milgram said this shows the power of just telling somebody what to do. If you put somebody into a group and somebody in that group tells them what to do, irrelevant of their motivation or their personality, they will often be obedient. So you can see this is a direct effect. When somebody in the group tells you what to do, you're going to be obedient. Social psychologists also found that people will be liable to conform. So there will be instances where nobody in the group has to directly tell them what to do, but just by observing what most other people are doing, people tend to conform to it. So an example of this is called the Ash experiments. In the Ash experiments, a group of people is put together and they're all going to look at some lines, and there'll be 3 lines of different lengths and then one on the other side which is the same length as just one of the other 3 lines. So let's call the lines A, B and C, and they'll go around the room and say which line is the same length. Is it A, B or C? It would turn out that all but one of the people taking part in the experiment were actors, and they would all be told, get the answer wrong, and see if the person that wasn't an actor will say the wrong answer just not to stick out. And they found that it's something like 50% of the time people will say what they know is the wrong answer just because everybody else has said something else. So again, this shows this is similar to obedience, but now it's not somebody being told what to do. It's just people's fear of sticking out. You might have heard of this as the tall poppy syndrome, the idea that if you do something different, you're going to be attacked. You're going to stand out from the pack and you'll be ostracized. And this can be very, very traumatic for people and lead people to behave in ways that they fundamentally disagree with just because it's what's going on around them at work. We see this in recent discussions in organisations around voice in organisations. The question as to whether people will speak up or call out abusive supervision or whistleblow on unethical behaviours when everyone else seems to be engaged in it. And social psychologists say, can easily understand some people will do that, but most won't, because most people will conform. So we've got obedience, conformity. These are 2 direct effects of groups on individuals' behaviour. Another way in which groups can influence people's behaviour is that groups have a variety of sanctions or punishments that they can administer to individuals. Of course, these might be physical punishments, but they could be psychological punishments like ostracising people, pushing them out from the group, not talking to people, making jokes about people, bullying people. These are all sanctions which groups have to ensure conformity and obedience. A good example of this is the Stanford prison experiments, which some of you may have heard of. In the Stanford prison experiments, 2 groups of students were put together. One group was told, you're going to be the guards, here's your uniforms. Another group was told, you're the prisoners. And that was it. Very quickly, the guards started to become incredibly abusive, and the prisoners became incredibly submissive, obedient, and conforming. And the reason for this was the guards started to issue sanctions. They'd make them do press-ups, they'd make them stay up all night, they wouldn't let them eat food. They started to issue physical punishments to change people's behaviours. In some organisations, such as the army or prisons, we see these kind of sanctions being used by managers to change people's behaviour in the organisations. Because it's been shown, again, no matter what your personality or your motivation, if you fear you're going to get punched in the face, you often will conform to what you're being asked to do. So again, this is a direct effect of groups on individuals' behaviour. There's some other effects which are a little bit more in the middle. So sometimes these could be direct, but in other times they could be more indirect. One example is socialisation. When people want to join a group, they often find that they have to change their behaviour. They have to change what they think. They have to change literally physical features of their behaviour in order to join the group. In many formal organisations, this might involve wearing a uniform, speaking using the right terms. This is a form of socialisation, and that can be a sort of direct influence. But for many informal organisations, people are socialised more informally. So they just start to observe what other people are doing and try to fit in, because if like they say, you've got to dress for the job that you want. If you keep turning up and look like the kind of person that's in the group, you can very quickly find yourself accepted into the group. It's, for the fans of Seinfeld amongst you, this is a tactic George Costanza does when he wants to keep his job. He just keeps going into work, and even though they'd fired him because he keeps going into work, people think, well, he must work here. So socialisation can be direct, but it can also be an indirect way in which groups change people's behaviour. So socialisation, the way that we are socialised or learn to fit in. There can be some physical effects of groups on behaviours. Irving Goffman, a social psychologist, or sociologist really, I guess, talked about the influence of staging. Goffman says, in many organisational settings, people perform for others. It's like you're an actor on a stage performing for an audience. So this is the case in lecture theatres or lecture recordings, but even as a student, you're performing for your teachers. And you'll be socialised into certain roles, which we'll talk about in a second. But when that audience isn't around, you'll let your guard down and you'll behave in different ways. And the example of this would be, if you see staff in a service environment, so say a fast food restaurant, if you see how they act when they're serving you, they'll be saying please and thank you and be very polite. Then backstage, in their break room, you wouldn't expect the same kinds of behaviour. Perhaps most, what have I got that there for? Perhaps most prominently, groups develop set roles. We talked about the role structure in organisations in week 1. Groups typically draw on set roles with norms or normal behaviours that are associated with them. And people who want to occupy those roles have to act according to the norms. So these might be social roles like a mum or a dad. It might be an organisational role like a marketer or an accountant or an engineer. Or it might be a status role like a leader versus a follower. When somebody adopts one of these roles in a group, they have to act in accordance to those norms. So if in a group somebody adopts the position of the leader, they're going to have to be the one at the front making the decisions. If they adopt the position of a follower, they're not going to be doing that. And people find that when they act out of their role or outside of the norms, then they might find sanctions get issued. So socialisation, staging, and roles sort of sit between the direct and indirect effects. But now we've talked about some indirect group effects. We've talked about direct group effects. We can now talk a little bit about what are the benefits and challenges of groups. Why do organisations typically put people into groups? Why not just treat people individually? Well, social facilitation theory tries to explain how when we enter into groups, our performance may increase. And there's a number of explanations that have been put forward. Obviously, you've got things like economies of scale and scope, but there's more psychological effects than that. It's been shown that when we become part of a team or a group, we often want to be seen to be achieving within the group. We want to be seen to be making a contribution to the group. So we end up performing at a higher level. It's sometimes said if you want to go faster, go alone. If you want to go further, go together or go in a group, because the group pushes each other. It's why when you go to the gym, you're advised to go with somebody else to spot you, to stop you from quitting. Because you don't want to be the first one to quit. Everyone stays doing it. But the problem with this idea, and of course this can happen through all of the effects that we've just been talking about, right? Once you enter into a group, the norms might be don't quit. Once you enter into a group and you take on a certain role, it might not be part of your role to quit. Once you enter into a group, you might be fearful of the sanctions that could be administered if you're not contributing to the group. And all of these processes then can facilitate you to increase your performance. But one of the risks is you might end up paying more attention to what the group thinks about you than actually doing the task itself. And some very high-functioning groups might be very poorly functioning at their task because they're too interested in making sure the group works effectively as a group, not completing the task. And this is one of the other sides of groups. What we find is that whilst it is the case that in some examples, when people enter groups, the groups facilitate higher performance. There's a whole host of occasions when groups do the opposite, when people enter into groups and their performances decrease. And there's a number of reasons that have been put forward in the literature to explain why this is the case. I'm just trying to fix some errors on my slides. All right, there you go. So first, it might be the case, if you think back to expectancy theory of motivation, if we no longer expect that our individual performance will lead to a reward for us, if we think the group is going to let us down, or that I won't get the reward for my effort, we might not put in much effort. So, if you think about this, if you got put into a group to do some task at school or at university, you might think, well, if I work really hard, everyone's going to get a great mark that they don't deserve, but I won't get as good a mark as I do deserve because my mark will be dragged down by some other people. So this would lead you not to work as hard according to expectancy theory. In many groups, there's a suspicion of what's called the free rider problem, or a negative evaluation of group rewards. What this means is people typically assume that in a group, some people won't participate enough, won't contribute enough. Though these are free riders, like people will get a free ride, they'll get something for nothing. And some people might think that's quite a clever strategy. Like if you get put into a group with a load of brain boxes and they do all the work for you and you get 100% and you've done nothing, well, you've got the reward without the performance and without putting in any effort. That could be seen as a really clever thing to do, particularly if you go back to think about equity theory. But on the other side of it, it's not very fair for the other people, so they won't be motivated to do it. And this can lead to what's sometimes known as the tragedy of the commons, the problem of coordination in groups, which is when there's nobody to ensure that everyone's doing an equal amount of work, everybody assumes everyone else is doing less work, expects that their performance won't lead to the reward that they deserve, and so everybody decreases the amount of work that they're doing. So instead of having, a small number of free riders getting a better mark, everybody does worse, and this is called the tragedy of the commons. And one of the reasons for this is, again, there's a dispersal of responsibility and accountability. In a group, it's difficult to pin the blame when it goes wrong on one person, in exactly the same way that it's not always easy to give the rewards to the people that genuinely deserved it. We also know in many organisations there are direct influences. So groups might literally physically and psychologically sanction people, making them reduce their output so that nobody has to work so hard. Taylor in scientific management calls this systematic soldiering. Roy later on calls it quota restrictions, and throughout the literature we see it called chiselling, breaking, loafing. But in each instance it involves a group saying to all of their members, let's all reduce our output so none of us have to work quite so hard and we all have an easier life. Of course, this is a real problem for many managers. So what we can start to see then is that groups can improve people's performance. You can really get more out of everybody in a group, well-organised group, irrelevant of their motivation and their personality. You can facilitate higher performance through a group. But the opposite is also true. And we see this represented in kind of popular discussions of groups. Some time ago, James Serueki wrote The Wisdom of Crowds, arguing that when you put people together, they are able to achieve more. More recently, Douglas Murray and others have written about the madness of crowds, the idea that crowds can both be powerful mechanisms for improving performance, but also powerful mechanisms for decreasing performance, is one we see all around us. If you're interested, there's a nice little online game that you can play about this. So, let's see where we're at. I think, so we've talked about indirect group effects on individuals. We've got, why not fill it in? We've got social representations. We've got framing. We talked about social learning. Then you've got direct effects on individuals, things like obedience, conformity, and sanctions. And then we've just talked about some of the benefits and challenges of groups, the ways that groups can improve or facilitate high performance or can undermine it. So hopefully you feel like we've met the objectives for this session. If you've got any questions, please come to the Ask Me Anything drop-in Q&As, or ideally post them on Moodle so we can all see them. But hopefully you found this interesting. It's definitely an area of research which I think is really interesting and helps to explain a lot about individuals' behaviours.